Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to lunch at New Year's Edition. We are delighted. Can you hear us, Gail? Okay. We are delighted to be here today. First of all, wish you a very, very happy New Year. And there are so many exciting things going to happen this year, all the way to and including the election of the President of the United States. Our topic today is one of significant importance in Louisiana. We have massive challenges in Louisiana. I'm not going to address where they came from. I'm simply going to say they are, and we have to deal with them. Now, as a prelude to this, I will tell you that the election of the Speaker of the House was a signal that we're going to interpret as legislative independence. The two other candidates that ran for that position are seated here, and they agreed to come before Christmas, meaning they didn't know what the outcome was going to be, but they were showing their willingness to work together by being willing to come here and address this very important subject. We have to set aside partisan politics to meet the needs of the people of Louisiana and the significant budget deficit. So to all of you all, this is very Catholic, and at the bottom of the hour, we will go to questions from the audience. And I appreciate you being here, and before I forget, if you're not a member, please consider joining, and you may pick up a member's newsletter on your way out, and it'll show you the things that we did last year. So you'll know you're in the right place. It'll take about 3 days to get this video up, but be sure and go to our website, and if you're on Facebook, like us. To start us off, we have Dr. David Linville, who started with this concept last September, David? Not last September, trying to get our community working on it. So without further ado, I'll let Dr. David Linville tell you about the development of healing the political divide.
Thank you, Gene. Okay, the name Healing the Political Divide originated in a project conceived last summer for a series of forums dedicated to civil dialogue on controversial issues such as immigration reform, gun control, etc., to bring people together from different political persuasions to the same table. It was based on the premise that the present mode of political campaigning, with its soundbite simplifications and negativity, has the effect of sabotaging communication, heightening an us-them mentality, thereby undermining a sense of community and our ability to work together in resolving the issues we face as a community, as a state, and as a nation. This high-minded project attracted a small number of interested volunteers, but like many such worthy-sounding ideas, faded when it came to actual implementation. One of these, however, was Jean Armstrong, who thought it was worthwhile at least to devote LWB luncheon to it. So she asked me, as the originator, to say a few words about why this idea deserves to be kept alive, maybe in a different form than was originally conceived as a series of forums. I think it's probably too late to salvage much for the presidential campaign. I should add that, like credentials are unapologetically those of an academic, a retired history professor at LSU, where I taught for 38 years. So I'd like to present my thoughts in the form of an aphorism that I've grown quite fond of. And it goes as follows, with apologies to Winston Churchill. Reason is the worst form of cognition, except for all the others. Churchill, as you may know, made a similar remark about democracy at a time in the 1930s when Europeans were abandoning democracy in favor of communism or fascism. I think we face a similar situation with respect to reason today. By reason, I mean reasoning. Processes such as the ability to test arguments against available evidence, evaluating the credibility of that evidence, inferring what practical consequences might stem from any given course of action. Now, of course, I'm aware, as you all are, that politics is not exclusively based on reason, or even mainly based on reason. But I think you would also agree that the space, the sphere, that allows for such processes of reasoning has diminished in recent years and is in rather short supply today. At least, I don't think it's a mystery as to why this is so for anyone who follows the news. The proliferation of media, instantaneous coverage, the creation of safe electoral districts, all have the effect of insulating us from taking seriously the arguments of those we disagree with, leading to perhaps what is the greatest and most subtle tyranny of all, the tyranny of the like-minded. John Stuart Mill really nailed this in his book on liberty, when he said, while everyone well knows himself to be fallible, few think it necessary to take precautions against their own fallibility. If an opinion is not fully, frequently, and fearlessly discussed, it will be held as a dead dogma, not a living truth. The remedies for this are in part political, and I'm sure we'll hear that from our other speakers, but they are also social and cultural, in how we relate to people on different sides of an ideological fence in our daily lives. The main reason like-mindedness is so insidious is that it's so damn comfortable. The emotional stakes of risking our dearest held opinions are high, and it's totally understandable that we want to hang out with people that we generally agree with, and would rather avoid such discomfort on social occasions such as family holidays. But for just this reason, it is necessary to go out of our way to create countervailing tendencies, such as structured situations and spaces where political differences can be discussed, where people's stories can be shared, where protocols of mutually respectful exchange are clearly laid out, so that people can feel safe and comfortable discussing uncomfortable things. In a conversation I had a few weeks ago with someone from Together Baton Rouge, he suggested a model for this might be Alcoholics Anonymous, where people come together in a structured, regular environment and really are able to share things that they wouldn't share in a social situation. So perhaps what I'm calling for is something like Ideologues Anonymous. Whatever form it takes, it's my belief that a truly free society demands no less. And if anyone is interested in working on a task force for this, please feel free to contact me today. Thank you.
So you can see we have some very lofty goals. Our next speaker is Greg Kilburn of Gannett News, and he's going to give us a statewide view of how the political divide is perceived by the people of the state.
Thank you, Gene. Thanks for having me, and I won't be long because I know the real start of the show here to my left. I can assure you, as I've covered the legislature, both are dedicated public servants and want the best for the state, even when they disagree. So, in my experience, our newspapers, by the way, are in Shreveport, Monroe, Alexandria, Lafayette, and Opelousas. So, it leaves out two big hubs, Baton Rouge and New Orleans, but a big geographic area. And I've found political coverage that most of the people you hear from that respond to you on the internet or through phone calls, but more and more through social media, are on really polar opposites. It's the most fervent, people with the most fervent opinions, most rigid opinions, and they're usually pretty angry. Most of the people, and it's hard to remember that these are not most of the people, really, because most of the people, to be honest with you, are too busy, working and tending to their families and stuff. The ones you get to be, have time for that kind of diatribe. And those are the people, I think, that really make the difference, can make the difference in bridging this political divide that Gene talks about, and that you will see not as much in our state, although it's certainly there and certainly on the increase, but I think you saw through the last election that the electorate, while very conservative and certainly Republican in statewide elections, will not be painted into that corner if they feel like there's an option that they want something different. So I don't think that this state is, through my experience, has the same kind of partisanship that maybe other states, the rest of the country in general has. That doesn't mean there aren't differences of opinion. And when you've got 3 weeks to decide those kind of things, as these gentlemen, these servants will have to do beginning on Valentine's Day. What a great night to spend with your wives and mine. So, but these are, when you're talking about a $750 million projected deficit, and you got to figure out the best way to handle that in 3 weeks, and not just that, but they've got the policy they create there has to move on to the next fiscal year, where there's this legislature and governor are trying to change the structural makeup of our budget, which is clearly broken. And so there'll be different ways that folks will want to see them do that. They'll be discussing new taxes that will impact you personally and maybe your business. They'll be discussing cuts that could very much impact, especially higher education and health care. The Commissioner of Higher Education is here. The Governor clearly and the leaders of higher education have kind of done a shock and awe this week and last week in preparation to show what the impacts of such a cut could be. Yesterday, health care leaders sent similar warnings. So I think that you will see generally a very collegial relationship among your lawmakers, even if you don't realize it, and that they want to work together, but that doesn't mean that just because you're bridging the divide doesn't mean you still have core beliefs that that are your objectives. And so somewhere in the middle is where they will come, I'm sure, and where our state generally comes. So I appreciate Gene asking me here, and I can't wait to hear what these two House leaders have to say about their thoughts. Thank you.
I have to apologize. Jean had a family emergency and she had to leave, so you're stuck with me. But fortunately, I don't have a lot to say, and next speaker will be Mr. Walt Lachey, and he'll give his presentation.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me, and to all the guests, thank you for coming. It is a unique time in the history of the state of Louisiana. We are clearly on the precipice of something that hasn't been seen in many, many years, and may very well be one of the most unique times in modern history. But just to make sure everybody understands, when Cameron and I were invited here before, Christmas, we believed that at least one of us would be the speaker when we came to talk to you. But unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, neither one of us is in that role. However, I think it's, in discussing healing the political divide, I would say this. I think that in our modern times, we tend to feel like this time is worse than all the times that have gone before it. One of the reasons why that is because I think 24-hour news cycle, social media, hearing about every tragic thing that happens in every corner of the world, unlike we've ever been able to do before in human history, tends to have people focusing on the dire straits that we find ourselves in. But I assure you that this question of healing the political divide has been around for as long as men and women have been gathered in society. I just had the great opportunity this past weekend to go to a fellowship program that the Aspen Institute is putting on called the Rodell Fellowship, where they bring together 12 Republicans and 12 Democrats from across the country to talk about this very issue. The interesting thing was the way they went about doing that. They didn't inform us who was a Democrat and who was a Republican. They asked us instead to explain who we were. And by explaining who we were, they didn't want to know that I was the Attorney General from Utah or the Lieutenant Governor from Illinois or the Majority Leader from Pennsylvania or the Speaker from Florida. They wanted us to say who we were as people, what we believed in. And then we went about discussing the formation of Western democracy. And one of the first things that we discussed was the idea that the greatest fear that the founding fathers had was that the development of factions. They didn't call them parties. Initially, they called them factions. And I would say that healing the divide of the factions in the legislature here in Louisiana may be more important than healing the political divide among the parties. Because I think that anyone who's paid close attention to the legislature over the past many years would recognize that there aren't just Democrats, Republicans, and independents. There are, in fact, members of the Democratic Party that see things very, very differently. Certainly urban Democrats versus rural Democrats have many issues that are not in common. And on the Republican side, there are factions just like there are in the Democratic Party. And so all that to say, the fear of factions has existed for hundreds of years. It's not new. It's just something that we've always had to struggle with. I would suggest that as we find ourselves at this time, it's more important than ever that we figure a path forward that involves members of every party from every geography across the state of Louisiana to offer the best perspective possible on how to address these challenges that we have. And so you understand the challenges we have are both short-term and long-term. As we go into this special session on the 14th, we're being asked to deal with $750 million shortfall at this moment. But as of February the 10th, when the Revenue Estimating Conference meets, it could very well be $800 million. Now, to put that into perspective, what it means is that last year when we met in the 16th session, we passed a number of bills. There were reductions in tax credits. There were reduction in other tax expenditures, a suspension of commercial utility tax exemption, and we believe, based on the analysis of the fiscal office, that that would generate about $750 million for this current fiscal year 16. We also made cuts to the budget of about $750 million with the knowledge that what we had done was balance the budget. The reality, however, is that as soon as we left session, people responded to the bills that we passed. Thousands and thousands of people ran out and filed tax returns before June 30th so that they could avoid the 28% reduction in tax credits, which, in my opinion, we probably should have been thinking more about. I think that we were trying to get through the year and create a budget, but we should have been thinking about, and I'll never make the mistake again of not thinking about the way that taxpayers will respond to legislation that's passed. It's natural, there's nothing wrong with it, but that's what they did. And so when they did that, when the Revenue Department failed to set up the appropriate collection mechanism for the penny sales tax exemption, those things led to the shortfalls that we found in November of this year. So in November of this year, we learned that we had a $487 million deficit. Even though we thought we had generated $750 million in revenue, it never showed up. And so we never had it to spend. And that's why that number is now grown to $750 million. It could grow to $800 million. Certainly, the dramatic reduction in oil and gas, the reduction in cost of oil and the low price of natural gas has driven our problem even further down, but it probably only amounts to about 25% of this shortfall. The rest of it is just that the revenue didn't show up as we thought it would. And so the other factor is this: we find ourselves now at the end of January. The budget year ends on June the 30th. So what that means is, if we don't find $750 to $800 million to spend in the next 4 months, then we will instead have to make dramatic reductions to the budget. This is not to mention the fact that we'll have to work on a 2017 budget when we go into the regular session. I would say there are more than a few challenges to getting through the special session, because, as was previously mentioned, members of the different parties have different solutions for this. Certainly, we recognize that there will probably be the need for additional cuts, but we also believe that there will be a need for additional revenues. Whether or not we can do that successfully is a question. The governor has already laid out some options that he believes are appropriate. One of the things would be to develop a 1 cent sales tax. That would be an increase of approximately $216 million overall for the next 4 months. That would cut into that $750 million quite a bit. Further, that would also take 70 votes. The Republicans have 61 votes, the Democrats have 42 votes, and there are 2 independents. And so there is no solution but one that involves all of the parties. No, the Democrats can't solve it, and the Republicans can't solve it, and the independents can't solve it. It's got to be all 3 together in order to get it done. There's a 4 cent exemption on the commercial utilities that's been recommended. Also would provide short-term benefits and long-term benefits, and that requires 53 votes. So again, my suggestion would be, instead of focusing on party divides, we should be talking about factions in the legislature. There's no question in my mind that three of the 5 or 6 different factions that exist could get together and put together 53 votes for a vote like that. Additional things include things like tobacco taxes and others that will generate additional dollars for health care and also allow us to draw down federal money to make sure people have access to care. Those options are going to be heavily debated. There's also the ability to tap into the rainy day fund for an additional $128 million. Redirect some of the economic damages dollars from the BP oil settlement to the general fund to the tune of $200 million. And just to be clear, these are dollars that were awarded to the state in the settlement for economic damages, not anything related to the coastal activity or the other dollars that were received. These were actually awarded because of loss of tax revenue to the state during and after the BP oil spill. And so they have been allotted to do some different things inside of the general fund. In fact, Representative Henry passed a bill that would have put some of that money in to fill up this budget stabilization fund and Medicaid trust fund, and then I later passed a bill to put some of that money into higher education. But we may have to wait in doing that because of the needs that the state faces right now. These challenges are great. I'm happy to answer specific questions about it. I'm going to try to limit myself now, but I would say this: I was reviewing in closing, I was reviewing the Leaders with Vision pamphlet that was handed to me when I sat down, and I turned it over, and I just happened to notice that there's a list of values, and I think that if we're going to truly succeed in the legislature, then we have to first define what values guide us, and then find a way to honor those values. The values should be consistent between those of us who serve in public office, regardless of what party we are. And they're the values that Leaders with Vision lists as the ones that are important to them. 1, recognition of the intrinsic worth and dignity of each person. Another, work in need of a sound education in leading students to the truth. Excellence and quality, hospitality, courage to innovate, and the right to make mistakes. Compassion, mercy, and justice, service to the poor, sick, and uneducated, response to need, and respect for varied religious traditions and belief. These are values that should be universal in our society and certainly should be universal between any political parties that exist. And I think that the pathway back towards a more productive and successful government is to follow these values to a place where we can all sit at the table and exchange ideas freely. For the record, one of the last meetings that Cameron Henry and I had before the governor's election was a cup of coffee at a coffee shop in my neighborhood where we sat along together and talked about how we could find ways to work together. So I'm confident that when we go into this session that my friend Cameron Henry and I will be able to sit down and work through difficult issues. I'm confident that my friend Lance Harris and I will be able to sit down and work through complicated issues, and I'm certainly positive that the Speaker of the House, Taylor Barrott, will sit down at that table and share both his vision and listen to the vision of members of the other parties so that we can get where we need to go. Yes. I'm sorry. But anyway, thank you for allowing me to share that with you. I'm happy to be with you and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Representative Cameron Henry, and we'll get his points of view and input.
Thank y'all for having me. Everybody can hear? Good. When I stood up here, when I sat down, I said, what are y'all going to talk about? And they said, we have to talk about the political divide in Louisiana. I guess they meant the House. And my first thought came to mind is, I didn't know we had a political divide. Because if you work within the rails in the legislature, you don't focus on any kind of divide. One bill, Walt and I will vote together on. The next bill, Walt and I will vote opposite on. That's about the extent of the divide that I foresee in the legislature. You just can't have a divide if you want to get anything accomplished. Now, how you prevent that is to make sure that everybody's brought to the table and everybody has an understanding of what everyone's viewpoints are and what their priorities are, and you kind of work together in the middle to work something out. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you all, for the past 2 years, I've worked best with John Bell Edwards. He and I took over the budget 2 years ago. He and I and members of the Black Caucus and white Democrats and across the board, we all took over the budget. And we all sat down in the basement after every session, every day, and we'd spend 2 or 3 hours going over the budget, trying to figure the best way to get it passed. And was it a perfect budget? No. Was it a better budget than was originally presented by, at the time, Governor Jindal? Yeah, it was much better. And we didn't sit there and go, okay, we need 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. We just called the group of guys in, guys and girls, and said, yo, you want to fix it? Let's meet in the basement and work it out. So we did. And it worked out fairly well for all of us. I don't think there's been one individual besides maybe John Bell who's given Governor Jindal more grief than I have. And I'm as Republican as the day is long. But when I thought he was wrong, I pointed it out. And same thing with John Bell, same thing with Reverend Leger, everybody else. That's kind of how we work in Baton Rouge, at least in my world in Baton Rouge, is where you pull as many people in the room as you can, you work it out, you meet in the middle, and you move on. You can't dwell on this larger political divide where, to me, it doesn't exist. I don't have members of the legislature that I dislike because they are Democrats, or because they are liberals, or because they are too conservative. That's not how you get anything done in Baton Rouge. I guess, and I think Walt probably agrees, we all just work together as best we can, and you meet in the middle and you move on. If you're going to dig in on a particular issue, then that's fine, but you'll be on the side, dug in. And everyone else who's trying to accomplish something is going to be in the middle trying to find the best way to get something accomplished. And that's the group that we usually deal with to move things forward. As I think Walt's probably correct on the fractions in the House. You really don't have liberals and conservatives and Republicans and Democrats. Titles mean absolutely nothing. Take Sam Jones, who's probably one of John Bell's closest advisors. I know 15 or 20 Republicans that Sam Jones has a better lobbying score with than they do. And Sam Jones is a Democrat. He has a fantastic lobby record, better than a lot of Republicans. And most people would go, oh, it is, that's Sam, that's what his politics dictates. People vote their districts in Baton Rouge. They don't vote their party, they vote their district. If it's good for your district and it's good for the state, you can advance it. If it's not good for your district, you're going to have problems with it. That's just, I mean, the members that I've met with, the ones that have actually been able to accomplish something in Baton Rouge and pass bills and build coalitions, that's what they focus on. You know, as far as the speaker's race go, we both ran, we both lost, you move on. It's over. I mean, at 4 years, we're going to literally sitting next to each other or close to it for the next 4 years. There's no reason to harbor bad feelings because we both are going to live here after that. This isn't Washington where you fly back home and never see it. Walt and I are going to be in here 4 years from now, regardless of whether we work something. We'll both live in Louisiana. I'll be here with my wife. My 4 children will all live here. So we have to make the place better than it is now. How we get there is where the compromise comes in. Can we raise revenue to meet expectations of $750 million? No, I don't think we can. Are we going to have a whole bunch of options on the table that we have to look at? Absolutely, because we can't, I don't think it's possible to cut that much either. So we all have to get in the room and figure it out. That's what legislators do. If you don't want to be in the room, if you've already made up your mind, and your district's okay with that, so be it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what your politics dictates. I don't take that personal. I don't think Representative Leger takes it personal. If he can be with me on a bill, he can. If I can be with him on, great. If not, the next bill, we'll try to work it out. I guess that's just how I look at politics in Baton Rouge right now. The main thing is you just can't stay mad. You got to move on bill by bill, moment by moment. As far as the budget goes, yes. If we have a very difficult time with $750 million shortfall now, $1.9 billion at least going forward, with the appetite for raising revenue amongst members not very high, cuts, no one wants to do that either. So we just have to dive a little bit deeper into the budget, and everybody has to come to the table with an honest solution. And I think we'll be able to get something that, at the end, not everyone will be happy with, and that usually means you've done something right. If one side is really happy and the other side's not, then you probably haven't really not where you need to be. If you're in the room and everybody goes, well, I'm kind of okay with this, and the other side goes, well, I'm kind of okay with this, then you've probably actually done something. You've moved the ball in a way that you get the 53 or 70 votes you need, and we can progress and move forward as a state. I don't know what my time is or how fast I'm talking, but 4 more minutes. Well, approximately 4 more minutes. Are we taking questions now or are we taking questions after? Okay, well, I will, perfect example of things that, I mean, if you want to talk about political divide, Representative Leger and I work very well together on the film industry. Hand in hand all the way through. Homeschool bills we worked well on together. The majority of the things that affect the metropolitan area where we live, we work together well on. It's just, I guess I get frustrated when people say there's a political divide. If you come and work with us, you'll see that the divide is greater, it's not as great as everyone thinks it is. I don't see it. There's not a single member in the legislature that if they call me now, I wouldn't go help them with whatever they might need. And I met with, just like Representative Leger, met with the majority of them while we were both running for speaker. And look, we're going to be spending a whole bunch of time together over the next 4 months, 5 months, whole bunch of time. So whatever political divide we have, or whichever political divide members perceive that we have, they need to grow up and get over it quick, because we have a lot of real work to do, because the decisions we'll make will affect individuals not only for the next 3 to 5 years, but the next 10 to 15 years if we don't get this budget situation under control. And I will turn it over to we continue.
Thank you very much. And now it's your turn. Does anybody have a question? Yes, ma'am. Would you stand? Sorry, our microphone system, our satellite system is not working properly.
So my question is, my name is Karen Ahmad, and I'm an injury prevention nurse for Lake Children's Hospital. And my question is, in the past I've noticed that the political divide was more than just in the House or in the Senate. Sometimes there was a lot of pressure put on the House and the Senate from the administration not to file a bill. And I wonder, would I anticipate that situation again? It seems to me I feel a little more relieved that that's not going to happen so much. But it just seemed like good bills didn't even get filed because it wasn't, the governor didn't want that to happen.
Okay, who wants to answer that? Sorry, the camera's still.
So I would say that there are a couple of things that have changed in the governor's administration. There were certain, in the revenue area, there were certain guardrails that our previous governor put up and said that he would not generate any revenue under any circumstances. And so those are the only bills that I'm aware of where people just got told not to file a bill. I mean, I filed every bill that I wanted to file, and I don't know anybody who didn't. Now, whether they can pass them or not, that's a matter of getting the votes that you need, and certainly an administration will make their views known. But when it came to the revenue issues that we faced over the last 8 years, there were a number of times that the governor would make clear, if you pass this bill, I will veto it. And so members would maybe not file a bill. I never experienced that directly, but certainly the administration as a third branch of government is going to use whatever power it has available to weigh in on these types of issues. I think that I thought of a couple of things once I sat down, and I think that the first thing I heard you say was the outside pressure. I would suggest that there is very clearly a political divide in our communities and in the public in general, and it's fed largely by misinformation and extreme comments about the political process. I think Cameron's right. When we get inside the building, it's not that we agree, but for the most part, we at least agree in a professional way. The thing that frightens me and the thing that I think puts our precious democracy in danger is the social media age where people say really terribly mean things to each other from the safety of their own living room, with a screen dividing them from other people that you then can't really have a real conversation about. And so I think that it's important what you guys are doing here in trying to create an environment for people to talk about issues. I find that if you can look someone in the eyes and agree to have an honest discussion about issues, you actually learn a lot more than you do from typing really mean messages to them on Facebook. And you certainly get into a situation like Representative Henry talked about, where you can find some middle ground. I guess the problem, though, is in the rest of our community, you're not really forced to find a common ground. You're perfectly free to whatever sort of opinion that you want to have, and you're perfectly free to express that opinion as aggressively as you want to, and so is the person who may not disagree with you. But when it comes to the work that we do, we somehow have to find a way to pass a budget. We somehow have to find a way to do some things that need to be done. We had to find a way last year to make sure that neonatal intensive care units got funded when the governor recommended that they not be funded, because the legislature didn't think that it was appropriate to let newborn babies not have a chance because of the zip code that they were born in. So there's always something that forces us to come together and make those kind of decisions. I guess in the community at large, that same pressure is not there, and it sometimes leads to additional pressure being put on legislators by constituents, which can also make it harder for us to come together.
We try to stay balanced.
I mean, Walt is accurate in the fact that other than the revenue raisers last year, that was the main thing that Jim said. If you pass, if you offer, if you pass, I'll veto. Other than that, most members will file as many bills as some of them too many as they possibly can, and just see what happens. And if they pass, they pass. They fail, they fail. I would suspect, and I would hope, because John Bell is such a recent member of the House, that he would understand. He has a greater understanding of what the pressure is as a House member, and what the governor can do, that hopefully he won't duplicate the things that previous governors have done and allow the House to actually operate as the House should. And I'm hoping that he does that, because he's one of us. He's a House member, so he knows everything that we go through, and obviously he knows the power that the governor's office has. I think that's, as it relates to your question on the bills. I would hope John Bell wouldn't go any further than and he already hasn't, but generally he's already said, hey, look, everything's on the table. And just by saying that lets members know that we have a chance of solving some of these problems and not having the door closed before we even have a chance to walk in and sit down and have a conversation.
Organizationally, I would like to add our thoughts on that situation, and that is, regardless of whether the person elected is a Republican and you're a Democrat, or your member is a Democrat and you're a Republican, those people were elected to serve all of us, not just their party. So if a bill is important to you, pick up the phone, send a fax, send an email, but convey to your legislator exactly what you, the constituents, want him to do, him or her to do. They represent all the people from their district. And too often, we get bogged down in labels. The only label is public servant to the people. Okay, do you have another question? Please, John, come up here. If anybody has questions, could they line up over here so we make sure we get all of the questions clearly? I'm sorry for the loss of our satellite system. John Gilbert?
What I think we need to recognize here, my feeling is that our democracy is threatened. And it's threatened because we allow so much money to get involved. And there are ways to stop this. And if y'all will bear, just give me 1 minute to put this in context. And then I'll ask a question. I know you don't make me do that. But I guess a few days before Christmas, a friend called me and said, you got to see this article in Forbes magazine. I go look this thing up, and the contributor was a guy by the name of Patrick Gleason. I said, well, let me see who this is. Oh, he's with the American with Tax Reform, Mr. Grover Norquist, right? Now, they haven't even waited for the new government to get inaugural before we are already trashing it. And this is because our red state has lost the top man. Well, look, that money that's coming into this thing, and when they set up a foundation, it's tax deductible. So these wealthy people send this money over here. You got all these little flunkies that are going to write these nasty things to them. Yeah, the question is, have either of you guys signed the tax agreement with Grover Norquist, either one of them?
I did my first term in office, and I did the same.
Well, can you have it rejected in some way?
The question was, in case you did any of us sign the Grover Norquist tax pledge? The beginning of last term, a group of members did, and I was one of them. We haven't received that tax pledge again. I don't think that was very well received amongst members, and just as a standard which members have figured out is you don't sign pledges when you're running for office or during office because you have absolutely no idea what the future holds for you, and it's better not to tie your hands, because then it goes into it goes into what do you consider a tax hike. If you clean up an exemption or a credit that doesn't work anymore, somebody could perceive that as a tax hike. Well, no, that's just common sense. If I don't get a good return on my investment, and that's what I learned with my MBA from Tulane, if you don't get a good return on your investment, get rid of it. So if by getting rid of something that's not working, if that's now considered tax hike, well then I've violated some pledge, and you're kind of tying your hand to some of those things. And it's just not, I'd rather take care of the people in District 82 that I represent, let Washington worry about Washington.
You remember here just a little ways back when we were trying to get some money here to balance the budget, we found a big group of Republican representatives and even asked Grover Norquist, would it be okay if we were to cut some of these taxes? Now, what kind of representation is that for a citizen here in Louisiana? And what I would like to ask you is how can we have a list put up of those people who sign this thing, and especially the group that feels like they have to ask him if it's okay to touch. And one more thing, would you please say, hey, this big tax break in the city, and our schools are failing and all of this, I think it's time. And I believe they would have to understand. We're going to cut 1% of everybody.
So there is a website that lists all the people across the United States who have signed the American Tax Reform Pledge. And as far as the letter goes that asked Mr. Norquist what the legislature should do last year, I'm not trying to defend those members, but I will say I believe that they sent that letter sort of as a tongue-in-cheek shot that they were taking at Governor Jindal, because Jindal was so committed to it. Most of the members of the legislature that signed it actually eventually just decided that they didn't care that they signed it and chose to move on. So, but the list is available, it's online. I would say, to speak a little bit to what you were talking about in the cuts that we face, it's quite possible, and I'm just going to list a couple of these cuts because the pages go on and on. It's quite possible without revenue that we would cut things like the pediatric day health care program that takes care of children with special needs. We would cut $200,000 of state general fund, which would end our hospice services. Generally 6,282 recipients of that in the last year. 1.2 million state general fund of the Children's Choice Waiver, which is a community-based service for children with developmental disabilities, 1,227 recipients. $700,000 state general fund, which is 1.8 million total, adult day health care, community-based services for alternative to nursing home care, 900 recipients, 400 on the waiting list. There are a number of others, but you'll find that the health care cuts that are being talked about are being focused on not because they are gut-wrenching and make legislators want to solve the problem, but because they are non-discretionary. I mean, they're actually discretionary expenditures. The other health care provisions that we make are required under the Center for Medicaid. So these places where we have to look, unfortunately, are care for the elderly, care for the developmentally disabled, hospice care. There are a number of other healthcare related cuts that we see coming, and it is even possible that we would have to go into the MFP, which is the K-12 funding formula, and cut it by 1% of the non-classroom related expenditures. So of the $2.5 billion that will be spent between now and June 30th, that we would be able to look at for the $750 million in cuts, they're all related to education and healthcare, including K-12. So it is going to be very challenging, and we're going to have to look at some of those incentives that we've given out over the years.
Back to the position of vision, and that would be that no elected official should even consider signing an agreement that is from a person outside of the borders of East Baton Rouge, of Louisiana, and is a registered voter. It is ludicrous to think that someone outside the state commands more commitment than the commitment to live up to your oath of office to serve the people. Wait a minute, he's first. Okay. Yeah, we are so Come on.
Question I have is, it's actually related to the last comment here, is that every time we have these budget difficulties, because of our constitutional protections, education, the hiring and healthcare get the lion's share of all the cuts. And
every year we bemoan the fact that's a terrible situation, but we have never done anything about it. So my question is, now that the crisis has reached epic proportions, will this be the year that we finally do something about all these constitutional protections?
Thank you, Cameron.
Well, it is if you all want to get rid of it. I mean, the constitutionally protected means it's got to come before the voters and you have to undedicate that money. So it's up to us to pass legislation that gives you the option to undedicate some of these funds. That's where it stops with you all. Do I think it's time to look at some of them? Yes. Do I think some of them probably are unrealistic to even consider? I think supplemental pay for police officers and firefighters is something that, in my opinion, is off the table because I don't think that it's ever going to get 70 votes in the House. It's not going to get up. I don't think the individuals are going to vote for it. I think you have to move on. But as you look, there's billions of dollars that are tied up, which is one of our biggest problems. And a lot of it's dedicated to education, and we know that's important for everyone. But to go back to your question of why do we always cut education and healthcare, because that's where all the money is. Like that's 75, I think if you include corrections, maybe 75% of the budget. Is that right? That we have, I mean, it's all tied in to those three things. So when you're making cuts in your own household, the first thing you go do is look at where you spend the most money. And for a state, that's where we spend most of the money, is in healthcare and higher ed, so that's why we always cut from there. But out of a $28 billion budget, the part that Representative Leger and I actually get to appropriate, if I remember correctly, is about $3 billion, $2.8 billion at the end of the day. That's we actually get to appropriate. Everything else is all dedicated, across the board. So when you hear $28 billion, just do 2.8, and that's what we get to divide. So when you go to cut it, guess who's in that 2.8? Healthcare and higher ed. So you can't have all this money dedicated. And I guess my push for undedicating some of these would be, it's not as if you're going to lose the money. If it's right now dedicated to, I think there's an excellence fund, an education excellence fund. Let's undedicate it, just put it back into the general pot, possibly. And you're not saying you're not going to get it, but maybe there's something else that's a greater priority that we might want to fund instead. But remember, this money's tied up for a reason. It's tied up because the people that I'm looking at voted to make sure, that's the constituents, voted to make sure that legislators didn't have access to it. That's what you have to remember. If something is constitutionally dedicated, that's because the voters of Louisiana decided we do not want the legislature to have access to this. We want to dedicate it to education. Same thing could go for amendment number 3 that was in the ballot this past session, this past election cycle. That was to allow the legislature to be able to raise and lower taxes, deal with fiscal matters every year instead of every other year. That amendment failed. So you could look at that as saying, well, the general public wants us to live within our means because they don't want us to raise taxes or cut any of the things. They only want us to have access to that every other year. This isn't political divide. This isn't This is the reality of what you all voted for. So you can only interpret that a certain amount of ways. So as a legislator, you go up there and say, I'm going to give you the option to undedicate some of this money. Fantastic. If you do, we'll be able to put it back in the pot. But you have to remember, as a legislator, you already once decided to dedicate it. So you need to make sure what is the legislature going to do with it. And are we going to spend it in a way that is just going to force us to find more money next year? I mean, this year, I think higher ed asked for an additional $1.5 billion, an additional $1.5 billion. Total. What was the increase? $650 million increase from last year. That is a tremendous, and I know the guys are here, that's why I asked them to know. That's a tremendous amount of money for the legislature. So in some members' minds, that's like, so your expenses grew by $650 million. Well, what is it going to grow next year? And if you know that the rate that our economy is not moving right now. So at some point in time, we have to figure out where is the money going to come from on a consistent basis to meet those demands. And undedicating some of that money is fantastic, except when you look at some of the money that we're going to undedicate, it's dedicated to higher ed. So by undedicating it, you're actually taking money from higher ed now, because it currently is dedicated to higher ed. So you have to make sure that the money isn't currently dedicated to the areas that you had originally wanted to go to in the first place. So, oh, it's a puzzle. It's not easy and it's not designed to be easy, but Walt and I will figure it out eventually.
Okay. Organizationally, we get many questions about the tax exemption. The organization would like to make a suggestion to the legislators. We're not talking about raising taxes. We're talking in terms, and I hope I've got your attention on that. Okay? We're talking about getting the money that the taxpayers deserve. All of our tax exemptions generally have either jobs or some requirement to qualify. There is not a good accounting system that is monitoring the incentives. And the question that people keep asking is, do we get the benefit that the tax exemptions were supposed to provide? So the recommendation that we're going to suggest to you is that all incentives, regulation of all incentives be moved under the Revenue Department, where they should be, and not in the agency that dispenses it, and do an audit over the period of time that there is, that is currently on their contract. If they had a 10-year contract and they're in year 8, audit the last 8 years. You're not raising taxes. You're getting the people the money that is owed to them. And that way you wouldn't be raising taxes. Would you care to respond to those suggestions?
Well, I think there's a couple of things wrapped up in your comments. So at first I thought that you were asking about the $8 billion in tax exemptions that we have for sales tax, but then I picked up that I think you were talking about the incentives offered by the Department of Economic Development to attract businesses here.
That's correct.
Yeah, so, I mean, certainly we are having those programs audited, and I think that we should look at strengthening the auditing powers to ensure that people are compliant with the contracts that they've entered into. At the end of the day, the Jindal administration tried to pay businesses to come here, and it just didn't quite work out the way that he expected it. It ended up with us losing money, and so I think we ought to be much more cautious about how we offer those types of incentives, especially when some of these businesses want to locate here anyway. If you look to Southwest Louisiana and the liquefied natural gas developments like Cheniere and some of those others, they chose to be here, and then we gave them a huge benefit for coming. There were only 2 places in America that they could go, and we were one of them, and they chose to be here, and then we gave them money anyway. I'm glad they're here, but we have to be more careful about how we invest our money. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that ever, I'm just saying that we ought to be more cautious. Now, on the other side, we do have $8 billion in exemptions that exist in our budget. If we collected those taxes rather than allowing people and companies to not pay those taxes, clearly we wouldn't be in the mess we're in. Some of those things make sense, some of them don't. And the problem is that it's very difficult to track the taxes that people aren't paying, because we're busy at the Department of Revenue tracking the taxes that people are supposed to be paying and collecting those. So there's not a very good model for tracking the exemption, because then we'd be tracking businesses that aren't paying taxes, like the industrial entities that operate along the river and have an entire 4-cent exemption on utilities. What we figured out is that because we collect 1 penny now, we figured out how much that's costing. It's costing close to $1 billion a year, 240 million per penny. So those are the kind of things that we have to look at. The reason we created that tax exemption, by the way, was because our natural gas prices were so high that the cost of utilities was not competitive with other states. And so we put this exemption in place, and natural gas was somewhere around $15 per unit. It's now $3 per unit. And so that's the type of exemption that you need to put a staircase on and say, when gas is cheap, you don't get the exemption. When gas gets more expensive, well, then you get the exemption, and that happens in a ramped up fashion. I think we need to look at all of those things, but it's not something that you can do in the next 3 weeks. It's something that has to be done consistently, and if it were up to me, we would do that, and so I hope that we will figure out a way to do that.
Well, just as the note as long as the people, the agencies that are granting the incentives are also the people that are regulating them, there is a direct conflict of interest. And I think if you were to check representatives, you will find that check into the regulation from Commerce and Industry. And when I worked there were only 2 people to cover every exemption out there. So we're losing money. We need to separate. This is a conflict of interest. Does anybody else have a question? Wait a minute.
Richard Lindsay. I have a question. I heard Representative Henry's comments, and I agree because I've been up there enough to know that y'all do work together when you're on the floor. But right now, Governor Edwards said plainly that everything is on the table, and I think he meant it. What disturbs me is the fact that I'm a Republican, and every single day I get an email from the Republican Party, from Dore, I think that's his name, just totally attacking the governor and his plan. Every time the governor opens his mouth, just throws something up, bam, they're attacking. And the same with Lobby. And I have had this conversation with Stephen Wagensback, who is an excellent guy, a very nice person. But they don't seem to be giving the governor a chance to listen to you and all the other people that listen to Walt, listen to all the legislators, get it all on the table and let you guys make the decision of what floats and what does not. But they're just not giving them a chance. My question is, how do you stop the Republican Party and the lobby and those organizations from attacking the governor before our legislature has a chance to look at the proposals that are coming out?
Well, I guess you have to look at it from this perspective. Stephen Wagensback's job is to protect business and industry. So he's supposed to come out against anything that he feels is not going to be beneficial to his clients, which is business and industry. Dore is a paid staffer for the Republican delegation. His job is to cover that aspect. So what I've learned through this process is that when people say, as I know Mr. Monahan was here a little while ago, and I don't know everyone in here, they are paid to take care of their clients. And I respect that. I don't have to listen. I don't have to agree with them. I have to listen to them, but I don't have to agree with them. From the perspective of how much sway does that have with all the members of the legislature, I can't say, because lobby has changed, evolved over time. Some say good, some say bad. The Republican Party has evolved as well. It attacked one of our colleagues this past year, too. I mean, they actually ran commercials against, they attack Walt all the time, yes, but Nick LaRusso was a Republican that came back, and the Republican Party went after Nick LaRusso. I couldn't tell you why, I didn't ask why, but he was a good legislator in my opinion. Not saying Stephanie Hilford won't. So I guess it's important for us to take the views of everyone in. As a legislator, it's your job to filter out the stuff that works and doesn't work, and not be swayed one way or the other by whatever group's out there, Mr. Lindsay, because it is a problem. I can't control Stephen Wagensback, nor can I control Jason Doring, nor will I guess, attempt to try, because they have a point, they have a position. I appreciate it, but is it going to be what I live and die by at the end of the day? No, it's not. And hopefully more legislators, they're coming to fruition with the members that I'm going to my third term, as is Walt. The members that are coming back who have been in the building long enough see that, and they appreciate the input, they respect it, but they also make their own decisions. Kind of what I said earlier, what's best for their district.
I would say a couple of things. First, political parties having power is not the best thing for a government, in my opinion. And we're fortunate in Louisiana to have open primaries, which means that everybody can sign up and run for office, and they don't have to go through a primary system like they do in other states. So we have more of an opportunity as public servants to step above the party and try to do what's right. And I hope that we will. Secondly, what I would say is, I appreciate your comments. I agree. Stephen Wagaspack is a friend of mine. I worked with him while he was in the last administration, and his job is to advocate for Louisiana business and industry. But there's a lot more to that than just tax policy. I mean, how far can your business go if children can't be educated in our K through 12 system? How far can your business go if people don't want to move here to work in a new business because they don't have access to reasonable health care? How far can business and industry grow if the things that we need in this state to be a civilized society don't exist? We don't have a high-quality correction system that actually tries to rehabilitate people who commit crimes, not just warehouse them. We need to deal with a lot of issues that promote business and industry, not just the tax policy. In fact, it's recently been released that we have the 6th lowest tax burden in America. And so the idea that we can't sit down at the table and discuss tax policy, that's fundamentally flawed. And business and industry should be at the table to discuss it. They don't have to agree at the end of the day, but I hope that they will actually get there to a point where we can talk about a reasonable tax structure that provides them with the things they need too, like a capable workforce.
This goes to the heart of why you are important as a citizen. People that have been identified, the organizations that have been identified here are paid people to promote and advocate for that organization. They're not advocating for you, the individual. So fill those emails and faxes and phone the district office. It's you, the citizen, that can make the difference, because that's your representative. They're supposed to represent you.
I'm delighted to hear that the legislators are getting along from what I heard.
Best as we can.
My question is, as I understand it, when the Stelly plan was rescinded, that was basically probably the beginning of our budget problems. And my question is, with the services that we citizens of Louisiana want from the state, and the items that you had outlined certainly are not acceptable to me to be cut. We want services, yet this pervasive thought of not paying the appropriate amount of taxes seems to be permeating all of Louisiana citizens as well as across the country. It's the same problem. How about the idea of reinstating the Stelly plan? And another thought is, when I served with the Foster administration, our workforce development program, we would educate welders and many other services industries. But when they finished their training that Louisiana had paid for, the salary that was offered them in Louisiana versus what they could get in California and Nevada pulled all the people that we had trained and paid for their training to those states. So there's many other situations that we need to think about involved in trying to right and balance our state.
Thank you. One of the values that leaders with vision espouse that caught my attention because of this reason is the courage to innovate and the right to make mistakes. I would say that the Stelly repeal was a mistake. And what we ought to do is just go in and fix that mistake, and we'd be more than 3/4 of the way to our solution. I don't believe that will happen. I'm not sure that the political will exists to do it, but what we really did was we repealed half of Stelly. We kept all of the exemptions, but we gave back all the revenue. So it created a disaster for us that has just grown and grown. It started off as a $400 million problem, and now it's close to an $800 million problem. So we really ought to just go in and correct our mistake. And I think that it's okay to admit that while we had $1 billion surplus, we thought that the economy was going to continue to grow. And so we made the largest tax cut in the history of the state. But in 2009, the economy across the nation tanked. And so when that happened, we should have adjusted our policy. But like I said, I'm concerned that the will is not there to fix that. But who knows?
Karen?
So I realize with revenue raising, sometimes you're begging from Peter to pay Paul, and you've got local taxes and so forth, as well as state taxes, but I have a sense that, you know, the folks across the state would have a little more tolerance for revenue raising on the state level if they didn't think that they were going to get totally messed over on the local level. And what I see on the local level is every 4 years when they increase your property property value, everybody you're paying a millage to gets a 50% bump. If they raised your property value 50% or 30%, then they're going to tack on some additional millages that they're going to sneak in on little elections where nobody shows up but the special interest group. So is there any, it may be outside of your wheelhouse, but is there any way that can be controlled on that level from your perspective, like eliminating some of these elections that are...
I would say this, we give local government almost no authority to generate revenue. The only authority they have is to do property tax. So what I would suggest is that we either give them more authority and that we do less for local government, which is probably the right answer. The state spends too much money on local government projects. We could fix our budget more thoroughly and not have the need to continue to pass the taxes that we pass if we would allow communities to do it. For example, the industrial tax exemption, where we give away local tax revenue to industries that want to locate in these parishes. I believe we ought to give the parishes the authority to compete against each other to find, you know, and the business can decide which parish it wants to be in, and the state can just get out of the way. We have a very paternalistic government in the state of Louisiana. You're required to go before the bond commission as a local government or local government entity to do almost anything. And so I really believe that the more conservative approach and the better approach would be to empower local government to do more and for the state to focus on the state priorities like higher education, like healthcare, the big picture items. So I think, you know, the answer is figure out a way to empower locals to support the programs and the investments they want to support, especially when it comes to infrastructure, and then we would have less of a need to generate the revenue that we do generate, and we could focus on the broader issues.
Could be a tough sell for you.
But with that one, I want to comment on as well. One of the biggest problems we have in Baton Rouge is we love to tie the hands of local government and then question why they come to us and ask for money. We do that constantly. And that's one of the biggest, I mean, we have 25% of our capital outlay is dedicated to local government. Think about that. 25% is dedicated to local government. Where I would rather the locals be able to go raise a millage, do what they need to do back home, and take care of it themselves. You want to build a playground? Build it. Raise a millage. When the playground's finished with, remove it. And if you can't raise a millage, then you don't get a playground. That's it. It's just that simple. And right now we are feeding local governments because we've tied their hands, because we have prohibited them from collecting local taxes. And to me, that is one of the, I think it's something we definitely have to address. And the fact that, as you call the political divide, Walt and I are both agreeing that this is a problem means that we should be able to find some solution to this. It doesn't mean that the industry is going to lose their tax break on local property tax. It just means the locals are going to have the choice of whether or not they want to give it or not. And I think that is what's most important. For me, I push everything to locals all day. They have a better understanding of it. They see the people in their districts every day, grocery stores, church, and that works better. In Cameron's world, that works much better.
All politics is local. Dr. Stewart?
Stewart, Secretary of Leaders with Vision. I'm going to pitch this to Cameron first, because I think Rob was here at the luncheon where we discussed this topic. Last year when we gathered, we talked about the notion of legislative independence, and the use of the line item veto and the veto override, and I was just wondering what are the chances you think that this might become a reality and alleviate some of the problems that we're facing?
Oh, we take away the power to do it?
Power of line veto.
Well, look, I'm all for it. I don't know whether John Bell would sign that. I'm sure the legislature would be all for it. But I mean, you have to think about it from this perspective. What we just did was monumental. But the fact that we had an election for a speaker's race, like we actually had a real election, an actual where people voted in multiple times, that was monumental. So the next step in moving this forward would be to do something like that. And can the House pass that? I'd give it a better shot at passing the House than I would the Senate right now. But that's something that the senators have to do. But I mean, you know, the governor of Louisiana is the most powerful governor out of all governors in the country. And it would be up to John Bell. If there's a governor that's going to do that, in my opinion, it will be John Bell. Because he served in the legislature no more than a year ago, or 2 years ago. And he understands what that means. Now, will he do it in his first year? Maybe not. Will he do it in his last year? Maybe so. But look, whenever we can get it, we can get it. But I mean, everything is a step. So we've taken one step, and it's something that we could absolutely present to John Bell at the right time.
Sure. One more question, and that's the last.
Hi, my name is Brian Adams, and this is just a question out of curiosity, and just, I know the devil is in the details, but as we talk about pushing the tax back to the local districts and giving them more authority and control over that, as you look at some of our districts that are in parishes that are very, very high poverty parishes, how do you deal with those parishes who in the short term don't have the economic base to support being able to tax themselves? Do we basically put those parishes at a situation where they're on a downward spiral where things get worse and worse for them because there are no funds now to support them and to support the needs of the people in those parishes?
Well, certainly I wouldn't support that, and I think that what you do is you go back to the notion of revenue sharing, which we still have. We share money with the local governments in a way that is calculated through a formula, and you continue to do things like that to support them. I just don't think you can be everything to everybody. And my opinion is that local governments get so much help from the state because of politics, and only because of politics. Because if a legislator can bring something home to their local government, then they get more power for that. And if they could build a water project in a small town, they get more power for that. But if you let that continue, you run out of money to do major programs. It's why LSU has $596 million in deferred maintenance. It's why our public buildings aren't taken care of the way that they should. It's why our roads aren't taken care of the way that they should. It's why our bridges aren't inspected, and dozens and dozens of them are likely to collapse in any given minute. So the more you chip away at the money available to do those things, the more problems you create for yourself. So no, I mean, I don't think we want to leave any community hanging, but we've got to figure out a way to not allow local government to take up so much of a share of the revenues being generated because of the responsibilities we have. And so I think that what we need is a cleaner delineation between state responsibility and local responsibility, and that way you can come together with the resources that you need to make those things work. But if the state's going to have all responsibility for the state and half of the responsibility for the locals, well then we're going to have trouble making ends meet, and that's where we are right now.
Of course, we don't, as a state, you don't want any one parish to suffer. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But you also have to be realistic in what you can pay for, and also have to be realistic in what are you doing to help that parish turn itself around. I mean, if it's every month, every year, the same amount of money allocation, all right, well then we got to get on the ground and figure out why is this area not able to attract jobs? What are they missing? If it's a poor, whatever it might be, we need to fix the root of the problem. Throwing money at it just requires you to continue to throw money at it. And most of the time, from the perspective of it, that doesn't benefit either side. They want to stand on their own. So we're not going to let any parish dissolve because they don't have a tax base that can cover that cost. Obviously not. But at the same time, we also have to look at why don't you, and what can we do to help you get the tax base you need. That's the bigger picture, and that gets us kind of in my beginning conversation of not 3 to 5 years, but 10 to 15 years down the road. Let's see if we can move us that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Cameron Henry. Thank you, Representative Walt Jay, and congratulations on being Speaker Pro Tem. Thank you, Greg Hillman of the Gannett Newsline, and Dr. Lindenfield. Would you please give them a nice warm round of applause? And once again, I want to remind you, all of the problems at the legislature are primarily because citizens did not participate. Doctor, all the problems at higher ed are because you never organized your alumni association to speak up and be heard. All this can be accomplished if we work together and let our legislators know, not by a paid mouthpiece, but by you standing up as a citizen and speaking out for what is good for this state. Not a Republican, not a Democrat, but as a citizen of this state. That's what we all are. That's what we do at Leaders with Vision. Please, if you're not a member, join us. Thank you. We'll see you next month on the 3rd Thursday.